Hey, what is going on everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and in this video we're going to be kicking off 2023 to a pretty awesome start by revisiting our old friend here, the PlayStation Vita. In this video, I'm going to be showing you all how you can take a completely stock PlayStation Vita and get it modified easily with HENkaku using a couple of tools at our disposal, one of them being the recently released HENlo, and another one being VitaDeploy. Now, this does differ from previous methods that I have followed and I have shown you all before, and this makes it even easier than before, and on top of that, you do not need to have any reliance on PlayStation Network, meaning you do not need to access PlayStation Network to download a game, a demo. You don't have to worry about putting a PlayStation Network account on your console. You don't have to worry about any of that. So if you have a system where you just don't want to put a PlayStation Network account on there, or you don't want any reliance on there, or maybe it's even a banned system for whatever reason, you no longer need that, which is really great for anyone trying to modify their PlayStation Vita on a firmware above 3.60. We haven't had anything like this since the original 3.60 modification, so this is incredibly awesome and exciting to see. To give credit where credit is due here, this is going to be made much easier thanks to HENlo, which was teased several years ago by The Flow and was released as a late Christmas present in 2022. However, just the WebKit and kernel exploit chain itself was released, but there was not a full jailbreak tied to this yet. However, HENlo was then used to create HENlo JB by SKG Liba as well as Yoti, which really just ties this all into a full WebKit based jailbreak, so we're able to actually utilize this. Now, this video is also going to be a bit of a visual adaptation of the accompanying guide, which was also written and hosted by SKG Liba, so I do want to give a shout out and thank you right here, just because I will have this linked down below in the description in case you want to check out the written guide and follow it for yourself, but also of course because SKG Liba is going to be hosting the implementation that I will be linking and utilizing for this video. Now let's go ahead and get some prerequisites out of the way. First of all, you are going to need, of course, your PlayStation Vita. The good news is this works on every model of the Vita, meaning if you have a PlayStation Vita 1000 model, a 2000 model otherwise known as a Slim, or a PlayStation TV or a Vita TV, this will work for any of them. I'm personally going to be using a PlayStation TV for this installation. However, from here on out, I'm going to refer to all of them as the Vita because the process is mostly going to be the same. It is going to change a little bit for the 1000 model. In the past, you would have had to have a memory card for the 1000 model. However, there's something really cool with this here in which you don't have to have a memory card to modify your 1000 model Vita. So I'll show you how to do that as well. We can also go ahead and get one of our settings out of the way here, and this is going to be to disable future firmware updates from automatically updating here. From here, we can just go over to our settings. We're going to come all the way down here to System, and we're going to go to Auto Start Settings. And this is the option we need to disable, which is going to be download update file for system software. That's just going to be so we don't accidentally update our Vita now or in the future when we modify it. Speaking of firmware updates, at the time of recording this video, this does work on the latest firmware, which is fantastic, and I'm going to be showing you all how to do that here, because the idea is going to be if you're on the latest firmware, we're going to get the system modified and get it downgraded to 3.65 so we can run a permanent custom firmware on there and still run all of our latest games and such. To do this here and check your firmware, you can go right back over to System, go over to System Information, and right here it's going to show your system software. Now at the time I'm recording this, the latest system software version is 3.74, and as you can see, my system has already been updated to 3.74. If you see a different number for this in the video title and description and such, that just means that this is still going to be working and the method can still be followed for a later system firmware version, which is fantastic. But right now we're going to be covering all this this for 3.74. So in case you do need to update your system here, if this is working on the latest system firmware, you can easily do an update through the system updater itself, or if you want to target a specific firmware or manually update your system, I do have a video showing how you can manually update a PlayStation Vita or even a Vita TV, so you can check that out separately. Now let's work on getting our system modified. We do have our system in front of us. We will need it connected to the internet, and if you're using a regular Vita, I would also recommend plugging this into a charger for this process. First of all, let's go ahead and go over to the web browser. This is mainly going to be our friend here. Now once it loads up, we can exit out of this and we can get everything cleaned up that we need to. So you can come down here, go to settings, and we're going to just come down to delete cookies, say yes, clear our search history, say yes, and we should be good on that front. Let's go ahead, close out of the web browser and open it back up with everything cleared out. So once that's all ready to go, it's pretty simple at this point. You can just go to X, come over here. Now here's the site that we're going to be hitting on screen, and in case this does change, I am going to have this linked down below in the description so you can double check that here on the video. But once you plug in the site itself, you can just hit enter or R2 and wait. Once the HENlo bootstrap comes up, it's going to be pretty simple to walk through this. First of all, you need to come down here to install HENkaku, press the X button, and let this all install. Next, you're going to need to install VitaDeploy. Now there's going to be two options here. Most people are just going to select install VitaDeploy. This will be if you have a PS Vita 1000 with a memory card, a 2000, a PlayStation TV, or a Vita TV. However, if you have a PlayStation Vita 1000 model and you do not have a memory card, you're going to have to select this replace near with VitaDeploy option, and I'm going to cover some specific options for your configuration. Either way, with whichever system setup you have, go ahead, select the appropriate option. For me, I'm going to install VitaDeploy, so I'm going to just go through this process and let it install. Once that's done, we can now exit out of here. And once that's all done, we can now come down over to our latest installed apps, and you should see VitaDeploy showing up. Real quick, before we launch that, we will need to go over to settings, go into settings, go to HENkaku settings, and enable unsafe homebrew. Once that's been enabled, we can close out of settings. Now real quick, this section of the video is going to be for PlayStation Vita 1000 users who do not have a memory card. You are going to have to physically restart your Vita. So go ahead, turn off your Vita and turn it back on. Once your system comes back up, and again, this process here is only going to be for 1000 model users without a memory card, you should notice that your Near app has been replaced with VitaDeploy. However, we cannot use it just yet. So for this to work, we are going to come back up to our browser, make sure you're connected to the internet again, and we're going to have to go back to that site that we had gone to before. Once HENlo launches, we're going to have to come down to install HENkaku and run this yet again. Once HENkaku has been installed, we're going to press X on exit and wait for this to close out. And now at this point, HENkaku should be running yet again. To check this, we can come down to settings, launch settings, and double check that HENkaku settings is running. Up here, you're going to want to make sure again that enable unsafe homebrew has been enabled. Now that all that's been enabled, we can finally enter into the VitaDeploy option. Once VitaDeploy is launched, again, repeating this for PS Vita 1000 users who do not have a memory card, you will need to come down to miscellaneous and go down to create an internal memory card. Here, this is going to give you a warning, and if you understand the warning and you're okay with it, you can continue on. From here, you're going to want to select the default 2xxx storage configuration. Yes, I know that you're on a 1000 model, however, we're going to be going with a 2000 model storage configuration, which will give you 1 GB of internal storage. Once that's done, you can just press any key to reboot. If you're prompted at any point to format a memory card, make sure you do that, and once you get to this menu here, you can now come down to your settings, open them up, and we're going to now go down to System and check out the system information. And you should notice here that you should have about 1 GB of storage on your 1000 model Vita. So congratulations, you now have a memory card without having a memory card, which is pretty cool. Now with this magical 1 GB of storage available and with the memory card created, we're going to just go through this process one more time before we continue on with the actual full modification. So to do this, we're going to have to come back up to our browser, and we're going to relaunch that site yet again. For this, we're now going to come down to Install HENkaku, press X, and let it install. And this time around, we're going to come down to Install VitaDeploy, press X, and let it install VitaDeploy normally like you do have a memory card, because at this point, you kind of sort of do have a memory card. Once that's complete, we can now press X on exit and let it close out of HENlo. And once it's all closed out, if you come down here, you should have VitaDeploy showing up. Now, one more time, we're going to go into our settings, go over to HENkaku settings, and make sure Enable Unsafe Homebrew is enabled. With that all checked, we can now continue on with the rest of this through VitaDeploy. No matter which model Vita you're using, you should now be up to speed to continue on. So for this, we can now go to the VitaDeploy option. Again, you'll want to make sure that Enable Unsafe Homebrew has been enabled, and now start up VitaDeploy. It should bring you to a menu a little something like this. And the first thing we're going to do is get our system downgraded. Yes, it does sound a bit odd, but trust me, this is the better option here. We're going to downgrade our system to a lower firmware. For this, we're going to go to Install a different OS, and we're going to do a quick 3.65 install. Just press X on here and wait. It's going to have to download the updater as well as the update package files. Just let it do its thing. It's going to now close out of that once everything's been downloaded and launch Madoru, which is going to be our firmware downgrader. As you can see, our current firmware is the latest version. You can also see the factory firmware, which is the lowest firmware that you can take your system to, and our target firmware. It is important to note here that you cannot downgrade your system lower than the factory firmware. So as you can see, this works for me to go down to 3.65, and hopefully it should work for you. Unfortunately, if you are one of the unlucky few who has a really late run Vita that cannot take 3.65, you won't be able to get the permanent custom firmware on here. However, if you are able to continue on here, as you can see, we are targeting 3.65 with Enso. We can now press X to confirm, and this is going to give us another warning right here. Make sure you read this warning, understand it, and wait for the time to pass to allow us to continue. If you accept the terms here, you can now continue on, and once you continue, I recommend just letting this do its thing. Put your controller down, put your Vita down somewhere. If you're using a Vita, make sure it is hooked up to a charger and let it do its thing. Do not touch it until it's complete. After some time of processing, it's now going to begin installing the 3.65 firmware. Again, just wait for it to complete. Once it completes, it is going to automatically reboot your console. Now, once your system reboots, you will be able to tell a few ways if this has been successful. First of all, it is alive and it is rebooted. Secondly, you might notice that the battery indicator is now a percentage. That means that one of our plugins for the battery itself has been enabled here. But of course, we can also come down to our settings, launch this, and you should see up top here, we're going to have HENkaku settings show up. So congratulations, this is working properly. We can also come down here to System, go to System Information, and within here you should see that this has now been downgraded to firmware 3.65 and this is running HENkaku. So congratulations, your system is now running a permanent custom firmware. Super awesome to see. Real quick, while we're here, you're going to want to come up to HENkaku settings, and again, you're going to want to make sure, this is normally what's recommended, enable PlayStation Network spoofing, enable unsafe homebrew, enable version spoofing, and for the spoofed version, this is where you're going to punch in the latest firmware version so you can get onto PlayStation Network. For example, right now, the latest firmware version out is 3.74. So I'm actually going to correct this to 3.74, come down here, hit OK, and exit out of this. If you want to change anything else, such as the circle button behavior, or do anything else that might stick out to you here in the settings, this is where you can modify everything. However, for this, since I've changed my spoofed version, we should be good to go. I'm going to back out of this, and we can now continue on. So for this, we can now install other applications and introduce ourselves to the world of Homebrew. Now, we only have one Homebrew application, but it's a fantastic one. It's VitaDeploy. We can go back into VitaDeploy and launch this. From here, you're going to want to scroll down to the app downloader, and you want to download a few new applications. Now you can go through here and pick what you want on this. This is going to be my recommendation though. I'd recommend getting VitaShell, so we actually have a file manager on here, the VitaDB downloader, so we can download more Homebrew, the iTLS installer, so that way, as it says here, we can get TLS version 1.2 support in older firmwares, so we can get online on PlayStation Network and such. And you can download other things on here if you wish to. I'm not going to cover everything, but for example, the YAMT installer, this would be if you want to use a SD to Vita on your system. I'm not covering it here, but I do have a video showing how you can increase the storage size on your Vita. Adrenaline allows you to unlock the PSP emulator built into the system, and really there's just so much more on here, so even if custom themes is your thing, or if you want PSV ident to show console info, you can grab all of that. For now, these are the three that I'm going to be downloading and covering. So for this, select which ones you want, and go to download selected apps. And once you do that, again, just let it do its thing. It's now going to download all the apps and install them. Once that's all complete, it says we can now exit out of this app, so that's exactly what we can do. You can press the PlayStation button and close out of here. And once you come back to your home screen, check this out. We have new applications. So the first one we should launch here is iTLS Enso to get TLS 1.2 support on our system. Simply open up iTLS Enso, and thankfully it's pretty simple here, yet again thanks to SKG Liba. You're just going to want to highlight the install the full iTLS package option, press X on here, and let it do its thing. Once this is complete, it's going to automatically reboot your system. Once your system has rebooted, we should have iTLS Enso working in the background there, so to speak, since we have the certs that have been updated and installed on here. So if you want to get onto the PlayStation Network store or play games, you should be able to do all of that now. The next thing we can check out is the VitaDB downloader. This is essentially a Homebrew store where you can check out the wonderful world of Homebrew. This will take a little bit of time to set up. Don't worry, it's nothing difficult. It just has to download and extract a lot of assets. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Go ahead, find the VitaDB downloader, and open it. Now, if you have a freshly modified Vita, you're probably going to get a message like this saying that libshacg.suprx is not installed. Now, this is just a file that is utilized for many really awesome Homebrew ports out there of different games. So what this will do here is extract it and set it up for you so you don't have to do it later on. That makes it easy for us. It's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting, so don't worry, this is good stuff here, just hit OK. Now it's going to do some magic here by downloading a few things, going into the package installer. It's doing all of this automatically. I'm not touching this at all. You're just going to want to let it do its own thing right here. Don't worry about it. Next, it's going to download another application called Shark Food. Again, we don't have to worry about this all too much. It's going to do all the heavy lifting for us, and it's going to automatically set up everything. Once that's all been set up here, we should now come back to the VitaDB downloader automatically, and it's going to give us this option asking if we want to check for updated Homebrew on here, and saying that you will have to set up a plugin. This is optional, you can say yes or no on here. I'm just going to go ahead and say yes to this because, well, it's an updater. This will now begin the process of getting everything set up for the initial run of the VitaDB downloader, and this is where I said it's going to have to download and set up a lot of assets. This could take a few minutes here, so just let it do its thing. Now, after a few minutes, it should launch to this here, and check this out. You can go through and find some really awesome Homebrew that is all available from VitaDB. So this just makes it all much easier to download and install directly on the Vita itself. Do keep in mind that you might be excited and you might see some games like this, but there are going to be games which will just download the Vita specific things. However, you are going to need to bring your own game assets to this. One of them being Mass Effect Infiltrator Vita, for example. Yes, it's only 2 megabytes, but this is not going to be the full game. This is really just the loader and everything for this, but you are going to have to bring your game assets separately. Now let's install something as an example. For this, I'm going to grab the latest version of Apollo Save Tool. So to download something, we can just highlight it, press the X button, and it's now going to download and install the VPK file itself on here to give us the app. And there we go. It was as simple as that. We can now close out of VitaDB Downloader and close out of everything else that it's opened as well too. And once we come back here, we should have the Apollo Save Tool or any other homebrew applications that you've installed. So there you go, it's as simple as that using the VitaDB downloader. Lastly, let's talk about plugins on here. For this, I'll show you where plugins will reside. We can go ahead, open up VitaShell, which will be our file manager on the Vita. Once this is all opened, you can go down to UR0, and we're going to go to the TIE folder, and you're going to see a whole lot of files right here. Really, the only one we need to worry about is config.txt. You're going to want to be careful with this, but as you can see, this is going to be all of the plugins that we have for our system. And this is how the custom firmware works. It relies on plugins, so you can really just build it for your own wants, needs, and desires, which is great. If you want a plugin for a specific thing, you add it on there. Zero Syscall 6, for example, allows you to run games, DLC, and other content, which requires a firmware higher than 3.65. No NPDRM allows you to make backups of games, applications, DLC, but also play games, backups, DLC in the no NPDRM format. Now, if you ever want to manually add plugins on here, you would transfer the plugins into the UR0 TIE folder, then you would go into config and you would add everything into config. So for example, if you want to add something new here, you can highlight this, press a triangle button, insert an empty line, and then from there, you can enter the path to your new plugin that you've popped in. I'm going to close out of this, and I'm not going to save my modifications because I haven't done anything there, but I'm also going to show you all how you can use FTP to transfer over a different application, which will make setting up plugins much easier if you'd like an automated setup. What we can do for this is go back out to the home menu here on VitaShell, press the start button, and you can pick how you want to hook this up to your computer. Now you can pick either USB or FTP. FTP is going to require a FTP client, and we're going to do this on our network, so make sure you might have a computer on hand, and you're going to make sure the Vita and your computer are on the same network. Or if you want to connect your Vita through USB, you can simply select USB and then plug it into your computer that way. I'm going to use FTP for this since I'm on the PlayStation TV, but what you want to do is make your selection, press circle, and then to launch that, we're going to come here. Just make sure you're on the home screen of VitaShell or anywhere else here, press the select button, and you should now have a pop-up with either USB or FTP. I'm going to keep this up and running, and let's work on getting our new application transferred over. For this, I'm on Windows personally, and as a Windows user, I'm going to be going with WinSCP. It will be linked down below in the description of this video, and you can just download it and install it easily enough. Next up, the application I use for automatic plugin management here is going to be, well, pretty aptly named AutoPlugin 2. The link for this will be down below in the description, and once you come to this GitHub page, you can click on Releases, and once you come here, click on the AutoPlugin2.vpk and just download the latest version of this. Now, if you're going through the FTP method and you're using WinSCP, it might look a little daunting, but it's not too difficult to use here. You can click on New Session, and for this, we can go ahead and create a new site. We're going to select FTP, no encryption, and here we're going to put in our Vita's information. Look over at your Vita, and we're going to look for the IP address as well as the port number. Keep those in mind. Now I've plugged in my IP address, my port number. We're going to do an anonymous login, and with that all set up, we can now click on Login. And as you can see on our computer, we can now see all of the folders that we had access to on VitaShell. So to transfer things over, thankfully it's not too difficult to do. In this example, we're going to transfer over a VPK, which is our installable homebrew file. So for this, we can go to our UX0 folder. And typically I create a new folder in here by just clicking on right click, new directory. And I'm going to call this one VPK for example. And inside that VPK folder, you're just going to right click, upload on the left here, our AutoPlugin 2.vpk, and hit OK. And of course, make sure on the left hand side, this is our computer, and you're going to want to navigate over to wherever you've saved this. Once that's all completed, we can now close out of here. Back over at the Vita, you can now cancel this because we're done, and go down to UX0, go over to where you transferred over your VPK file, highlight the VPK file, press X, and press X yet again to install. It will give you this message right here, and as long as you understand it and trust it, you can continue on. Now, once it is installed, that should disappear. We can now hit the triangle button, go down to delete, and yes, because we no longer need the installable file, let's go ahead and close out a VitaShell, and if we come back over to our home screen, you should see AutoPlugin 2 has been installed. Let's go ahead and launch this. Now the nice thing is this also does go in and automatically update any plugins that might be outdated here, and once that's all done, we can press circle to return to menu, and here we can go ahead and check this out. Now, for example, if you come to Vita Plugins, you can go to Install Plugins, and you can just highlight and see which plugins are available here to install. So for example, 0syscall6, as I said earlier, this is needed if you want to play any content that requires a higher firmware, so you can play on your lower firmware device. And the cool thing is here, if you notice, there is a green light next to this. So if you have a green light next to one of these plugins, that means that it's already installed on your Vita. Now, as an example, if you want to set something up, I'm going to go with Cap Unlocker. So Cap Unlocker is pretty nice for some of those game ports out there on the Vita. If you do want to use this, you can just press the X button. It'll give you more of a description here, and you can press OK if you're okay with that, and install it. And just like that, it's been installed. I also like to do a custom warning on my system. That's just me. So I'm going to do that here. Okay. Install. Perfect. And once you've decided what you wanted to install, you can just return to menu right here. If you ever want to uninstall any plugins, you can come right down here to uninstall plugins and select which ones you want to uninstall. You can use the left and right buttons to see which other plugins are available here, because as you can see, there's some other ones that might be available, such as kernel plugins versus some main plugins. There's even some extra downloads that you can grab here if you want them, so just another option for downloads. HD patches, so that's really cool to see as well. And there's also PSP plugins on here, so like PSP plugins for Adrenaline, for example. You have some things such as a undub for Birth by Sleep. You have the GTA native resolution patch, so these are super cool to see. You will need, if you want to set any of these up, you will need to make sure you have Adrenaline already installed and set up on your system, just so you can actually utilize these. Now, one last thing, if you're using something such as custom warning, you will have to come back over to it. Of course, it will give you this description right here, and if you want to actually modify this, you will have to press the triangle button to personalize your message, so you can put whatever text you want to right here. So really anything like this works. Once you have that all set up, go ahead, hit OK. And once you have everything done on here, or if you exit out of AutoPlugin 2, it will ask you to restart, so go ahead, say yes to restart your console. Thankfully, it also gives you this nice option as well too, just letting you know in case there's any issues with plugins, you will have to hold down the left shoulder button or the L1 button, so your system will boot up without plugins running. So there we go, we got my custom warning running, and we should be good to go at this point. The Vita is back up and running, and we are back in business. So here we go. We're really at the end of this video. Congratulations. I really hope this video helped you all out. I hope you have a pretty awesome Vita now that is running a permanent custom firmware on boot that also allows you to run all your cool, awesome homebrew and games and all that fun stuff on here. So the nice thing is with this setup, when you go through this route and use VitaDeploy and everything, it also sets everything up here with a whole bunch of awesome useful plugins to start you out with. Now with some final recommendations on here for anybody who might need to be brushed up a bit in terms of Vita modding, or maybe this is your first modded Vita. First of all, you do not update the firmware on your Vita. You're going to be on this firmware, just stay on a lower firmware. There's no need to update the Vita firmware anymore, if you still want to be modded, of course. Let's say a new firmware update does come out for the Vita. At that point, you would go over to your settings, open up settings, go up at the top to HENkaku settings, make sure PSN spoofing and version spoofing are enabled, and for the spoofed version, you would punch in the version number for whichever the latest firmware version out is. And once that's all done, you can close out of there, and I would recommend you reboot your device. Now, just because you have your Vita set up right now and modified doesn't mean this is the stopping point. This opens up a whole wealth of just knowledge and just amazing things to the world of a modded Vita. So some examples that aren't covered in this video, but I do have videos covering are, for example, let's say you want to expand your storage on the Vita. You want to use literally like a 400 gigabyte micro SD card instead of a small memory card that you might have already on here. You can do that using the SD2 Vita and using a pretty awesome application called Yamped. I do have a video covering that, so that shows how you can pretty quickly and easily and very affordably upgrade the storage on your Vita. I did also talk about the PSP because guess what? Within the PlayStation Vita's software, there is a PSP emulator hidden in there called the ePSP. You can install and use Adrenaline to unlock the full ePSP built into your console, and at that point you essentially have a custom firmware PSP built into your now custom firmware Vita. It's fantastic. And since you have access to the PSP side of things, that does open up the realm of PSP games, PS1 games, as well as PSP homebrew and emulation. It's just fantastic to see. Lastly, I did talk a few times about Zero Syscall 6 as well as no NPDRM. So if you have some games, like for example cartridge-based Vita games that you would like to back up and you'd like to install on your Vita as digital titles, I do have a video covering that for no NPDRM, and you should be able to hit the ground running thanks to the plugins that are already installed on here. Anyways, that is about it for this video. The Vita is definitely one of my favorite consoles to have modded just because there is such a dramatic difference and you gain so much going from a stock Vita to a modded Vita. It's really cool to see. I cannot recommend this enough, and I am excited for you all to experience a modified Vita for the first time if you haven't already. Anyways, that is about it for this video here. I hope this helped out. I hope this got you all sorted, and if you enjoyed this video, a like would absolutely be appreciated. If you didn't like it, a dislike is fine as well too. But anyways, this is Mr. Mario, signing off. Thank you all for watching, everyone.